Welcome to the Women Inspired Podcast. I'm your host, April Seifert. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who is inspired to action, and that's my number one goal, to inspire you, my listeners, to take action in your lives. Each week, I get to interview some of the most inspiring women, and I'm bringing those interviews to you. Let's do it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Women Inspired Podcast. My name is April Seifert and I am your host. And this week we are talking to someone who defines herself as a soul-powered wellness expert. We are talking to somebody who is a weight loss expert, who's a certified personal trainer, and who is currently in training to become a certified holistic nutritional specialist. And she has a ton of great information to share with us, all in that domain. And I am really thrilled to have her because this is the interview that we worked so hard to make happen. And we'll get into all of that crazy. But for the time being, I'm so thrilled to welcome Jaime Morocco to the podcast. Welcome, Jaime.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, April. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so thrilled too, because we got connected online and then we were both so excited to talk and so excited to have this interview. And then I think a couple things came up with you and a couple things came up with me, and it has taken us, it's been a road to get here. So I'm thrilled that we're on the phone.
Me too. I think that, for some reason, the universe wanted us to have this interview today. So
it is happening. It's happening. Yes. Awesome. Well, for my listeners who likely have not stalked you on the internet and done as much background looking as I have, help us get to know you a little bit and tell us a little bit about your background and the type of work you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So when I graduated from college, almost a decade ago, I was a personal trainer and nutrition coach, and I loved it so much. And then I made the decision after a couple of years to go back to school for my MBA in entrepreneurship. I knew I always wanted to have my own business one day, but I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to come to fruition. So after my MBA, I kind of ended up in the Silicon Valley tech startup scene for a couple years. And during that time, started an online nutrition and personal training business where I was working with clients from all over the world. And a couple layoffs in tech happened, as they are really, really common out there. And I decided to go all in on my online business. And that's kind of where I am today. So my business is almost 100% all online and focusing on helping women reach their wellness and fitness goals in a way that feels good and doesn't break them down and really supports their well-being.
That's amazing. So it's really interesting to me when I hear, I always love asking people that question for two reasons. The obvious, first of all, is that we get to know you, we get to know your background a little bit and, the type of work you're doing. And that's always great. But it's always interesting to me when people start to talk about their backstory and the path that has led them to where they are today. There's always these interesting left turns and these insightful moments that come up and, these time periods where it looks like they would have been on a straight path that would have, gone from point A to point B in a nice straight line. But inevitably, there's some windiness in there. And it sounds like there was with that as you sort of drifted from being in the personal training space to getting your MBA. And I'm just curious about, how you made that decision to go into that program and how that was for you.
Yeah. So when I graduated from undergrad, my major was entrepreneurship. And I had worked I worked my butt off in college. I mean, I'll be honest. In high school, I was a C student at best. But in college, my dad looked at me one day, actually the day he dropped me off. And I went to Suffolk University in downtown Boston. And at the time, mostly all of the students lived in an apartment. We didn't live in dorms. So he set me up in my apartment with my roommate. He looked at me and he said, if you don't get all A's this semester, you're moving home, I'm selling your car, and you're going to a community college.
Wow.
So kind of like lit a fire under my ass to like really get my shit together. So I went from being like a C student in high school to pretty much a straight A student in college. And, I partied really hard and I worked really hard. So definitely, no regrets there. But I always knew I majored in entrepreneurship and always knew that I wanted to have my own business one day. And when I graduated, I was told that I was going to get into the MBA program right after graduation at Suffolk. And, so it was 2009. I had just graduated. It was the summer. And, here I was not looking for a job, thinking I was going to go back to school for my MBA. One thing led to another, and September rolled around, maybe it was late August or so, but I got a letter in the mail from Suffolk saying that my admissions had been denied because I didn't have any work experience, and that they had reconsidered my application. And I'll never forget, I was driving in the car with my parents at the time, and I was devastated. And I really think that we don't really think about this too much, but when, after college, that's kind of like one of the, or after high school for some young kids or adults or whatever they are at that point. But that's kind of one of the scariest times, because it's like until that point in your life, you've had your whole life kind of like structured and planned. And for me, that was just a really big oh shit moment. Like, what am I going to do? So, I worked at a hotel for a little bit, and then I got a job as a personal trainer, and I just loved it. And I was working at the studio for a couple years. I worked my way up to lead trainer, and I was the youngest one there. And I was in charge of the private personal training studio, and we had another studio where we taught classes, and it was just an amazing place, but it was privately owned, and I wasn't really able to grow in the way that I wanted to. So after a couple of years, I decided that I wanted to go back to school for my MBA to just kind of help redirect my path, breathe new energy into my kind of outlook on entrepreneurship and everything in that sense. And I applied to 3 schools, and Babson was my number one choice. And that's the number one school in the country for entrepreneurship. And that's where I decided to go. So that's kind of how that happened.
That's amazing. And you're absolutely right. Up through college, for a lot of us, I kind of joke, because for me, it was all, up through graduate school and my PhD program, I felt like I was living life by the semester, calendar. Like, it's spring semester, it's fall semester. And I kind of knew the cadence of the year, and I knew what was expected of me. And I kind of knew when things were going to get busy and when they were going to lay off, and it would be a little bit more downtime. And I just felt like, yeah, it is really structured. And I kind of knew what to expect. So you're absolutely right that things do get really nerve-wracking for people at that stage. Also, I think it's really interesting that you majored in something like entrepreneurship. I have never heard somebody say that before. In everybody that I've interviewed, I've never heard somebody say that before. What was it about entrepreneurship that drew you to it, especially at the point where you were declaring that as a major in undergrad? Because that's really early on to be deciding that you're going to go down that type of path.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I initially went into Suffolk thinking I was going to major in law. And then I really decided I just don't have the personality type to be a lawyer. It just didn't speak to me anymore. So within the first month, I switched to entrepreneurship. And the reason I was so drawn to it was because I hate numbers. I'm not a numbers person. I'm not an economics person. I enjoy marketing, but it wasn't really exciting to me. What was exciting to me is learning how to create something out of nothing. And, my dad is an entrepreneur in the sense that he's a psychologist, but he developed a niche practice for himself, and he took a lot of risk, and everybody told him he wasn't going to make it doing what he did. And he ended up really, creating exactly what he had set out to create. And he always told me that the only job that's really secure and where you have the control to make your own vacations and how much money you want to make and everything like that is when you own your own business. Because, at least like the health and the state of, how the business is doing if you own it. So I think that was really instilled in me. And just to see like someone like my dad who, as a psychologist, I don't know how to say this like in the right way. So I'm totally like, this might come off wrong, but know that it comes from my heart. And I really mean this with a lot of respect for the profession and everything. But it's like anything, like a lot of these professions have these career paths that a lot of people just subscribe to. And they're like, okay, this is my destiny and I'm destined to make X amount of money and, have this many clients. And this is the extent of how my business can grow. And my dad really never had that mindset. He had the mindset of like, these are all of my possibilities. And actually, he became the only Spanish speaking professor in the vicinity of where we live. And there's a lot of, his Hispanic speaking communities that needed his services. So that's kind of like, I was like, wow, like you can really create, something, even though a lot of people say that, this is kind of the limit for what this profession does. So, so that mindset was, I think, distilled in me at a young age.
There's two pieces of it that I think are really interesting and worth calling out here. Number one, you used the words entrepreneurship and secure in the same sentence, and nobody does that. And so for those people listening, whenever I do an interview like this, we always have sort of a point that is not on the recording where we're just kind of chatting about our backgrounds and, how we want to structure the conversation, to some extent. And Jaime had mentioned leaving Silicon Valley after a couple of layoffs. And when I talk to people about my entrepreneur journey, like my journey into building my own businesses, I use the same word. I use the word secure because I too had been in typical jobs, like normal jobs that people used to feel like these are secure jobs, And I watched, so some layoffs impacted me, some didn't, but I watched at least one happen every single year. And I'm like, man, if I was working for myself, even if I was freelancing or consulting, I at least know when I'm going to be laid off. I know when my contract's coming to an end. So at least it's transparent, beyond anything else. So it's funny to hear somebody else use the word secure when talking about being an entrepreneur, because I don't hear that very often.
No, it's so true. I think it's because, especially like our parents' generation and even the generation before. And I think, some people still have this idea that like if you work for a big company or you have a job at, if you have like a job that you've been working at for a while, that you're going to be quote unquote safe there, when in reality, like we see how quickly industries and companies and things can change, especially in today's world. So I think entrepreneurship is the most secure thing that you can do for yourself because like you said, at least and there is that transparency. And you have the power to change it.
Right. And that right there, you have the power to change it. That's starting to touch on the second thing that I thought was really interesting about how, you talked about what drew you to being an entrepreneur. When you mentioned your dad being a psychologist, there definitely is. My background is in psychology as well. And like there is a definite typical path for each of the branches of psychology. And there's a sort of well-worn path that you can go down if you're in any of those particular branches of psych. And that's the one that most people go down. And it's interesting to me that your dad showed you or was an example of someone who was looking for the alternate paths or looking for an area where he could carve his own, because traditional business models are really changing today. The internet is a beautiful example, but it's just one of a tool that we didn't have as easy access to before that we have beautifully easy access to now. And so I love that you called that out too, this idea of finding an alternate path because there are so many if you open your eyes to them.
Yeah, there really are. There are so many.
I love it. So tell me a little bit about what it is that draws you to helping people lose weight and fitness and wellness. And I'm really excited. I definitely want to hear about that, but I also want to hear about your unique approach because I love the way that you described it when you were kind of giving us your background and a little history on you.
Yeah, definitely. As a kid, I was a little bit overweight, definitely very insecure with my body. And I was the curvy brunette in a group of, I had three best friends that were all really petite blonde. So I felt really just kind of like I didn't fit in. I was definitely teased. As all of us are with one thing or another. And when I got to college, I think my way of dealing with, the changes was to start exercising and taking better care of myself. And that's also when I started to get better grades. And, as I was telling you before, how I worked really hard. And I noticed how much better I felt about myself, when I started taking better care of myself, eating better, working out. And I kind of went the other way. So over the course of several years, I, became really into running. I was, really into watching, the food that I ate. And I almost was too thin at one point. And, the universe works in funny ways because at that point, that's when I had an overtraining injury called sciatica. And that's when I really had to take a step back and look at how I was training, how I was taking care of myself. And that's actually what got me into personal training. I really realized at that point, you have to find your kind of happy and healthy balance. Even more so, a couple years went by and as I told you, I'm a total open book, and I've talked about this on my blog and some other interviews that I have done. But I had been on the pill for a long time because I had, I had really bad cramps when I was young. So I went on the pill for a while, and I went off the pill in my mid to late 20s, and I never got my menstrual cycle back. It had been from a combination, I think, of a lot of things, but I don't think that my overtraining and, being strict with my diet helped. And I think that had contributed to the problem that I encountered, which is called hypothalamic amenorrhea. And it means basically a cessation of the menstrual cycle due to stress of the gland in the brain called the hypothalamus. That's kind of also what triggered me to go down the more holistic route because I really wanted to heal my body from this because it had been, I went off the pill, I waited, I did what the doctor said, they just wanted to put me back on. And I really dug deep and did more research. And within the last several months, I've actually been able to heal my body and restore my menstrual cycle, which is something I'm really proud of and really happy that I was able to do. But that kind of also reinstilled the idea in me that I want to help other women with their hormonal imbalances, with, things that they might be struggling with, when their body's giving them signs that hey, we need a little help, So that's kind of my story with it all.
I love that you shared that, and I really appreciate it because there's a lot of things about women's bodies and women's health, and a lot of it is hormone related that either explicitly or implicitly we are sort of taught and conditioned to feel like these topics are off the table for discussing, and it's not something that we should be putting out there. Because think about the things that people say about women who are about to get their period or whatever. Oh, she's so hormonal. Or I'm a little more than halfway through a pregnancy right now, and it's kind of funny to listen to people's, responses when, my husband will talk or whatever. They'll, oh my gosh, yeah, they get so hormonal and they're just so crazy. And basically what that kind of conditions us to equate is anything that has to do with hormones is irrational and crazy, and we should hide it and be ashamed of it and whatever. When ultimately, hormones are some amazingly powerful, and that can be good and bad. but amazingly powerful things. It's worth talking about, and it's worth being open about because it does impact our health so much. So I love that you're out there talking about both your story, but also the content that you're putting out there is so helpful for women because it's in an area that does really impact us.
Oh, absolutely. And I think and I'm not like a conspiracy theorist for most things anyways, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. But I do believe that, there's a lot of information that a lot of doctors don't know, and it's no fault of their own. And of course, Western medicine is absolutely amazing in what it does for us. But I do think that we sometimes discredit the healing power and the innate intelligence of the human body. So I'm really also about bringing forth information that I learn in my courses and that I apply to myself and with my clients, families, and friends, and I see working that really just kind of that just almost give the body space to heal and to, balance hormones or whatever it is. So yeah, no, I think that, I don't know where I was going with that, but I felt like I needed to say that too.
Yeah, no, and I'm curious about that. So, I mean, what are some of the things that you talk to people about in that domain? Because there is, my husband's a physician, and there's, bless his heart, but there's things that he is amazing at that, but there's a scope of practice there. And then there's stuff that he probably learned back in medical school, but it's not what he does every day either. And so, there's just expertise that comes from what you do day in and day out and what you're studying right now. So, no intent on dogging on doctors here because I would get in trouble at home if I did that. But, there's just things that people are just more up to date on and just practice more often. So I'm curious about things that you work with your clients on.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it in that way.
Oh, gosh, no, not at all. Not at all.
Who are physicians, and I am so grateful and thankful and, for everything that Western medicine does for us. I just tend to think that sometimes, it's not taught to doctors or it's not in the curriculum about things that are so powerful. Like a couple of my dad's best friends are ER surgeons and one's a radiologist, and they tell me they're like, we only had a couple of courses on nutrition, we weren't really taught that much about it. But I really think that something like nutrition is so powerful.
Yes.
Because you think about the food that we eat actually gets turned into the building blocks of our body.
Absolutely.
So when you think about it like that, it becomes actually a really powerful tool. And, to give an example, so what I had, it's called hypothalamic amenorrhea, and the hypothalamus, is a gland in the brain that I kind of think of her, and I call it a her, as she's in charge of taking inputs from our environment and telling the body how safe it is to, carry children or to have a menstrual cycle, or whether we need to upregulate or downregulate metabolism. So for me, it was all about my body's perception of stress and my hypothalamus saying, no, this is not a safe environment to have a child, let alone a menstrual cycle, let alone a child. So we're going to not ovulate and have a menstrual cycle. So I think that we often underestimate how our body perceives stress and the level of stress that we're under, and what that means for our health. Because when we are stressed, and when this gland senses a lot of stress, it can suppress our immune system, our digestive system. It can cause hormonal imbalances. So I think a lot of times, to answer your question, is that we just underestimate the amount of stress that we're under and what that ultimately means for our health and well-being.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I mean, ultimately, my opinion and whether I agree with you doesn't matter. But what does matter is that there's a ton of research and data that would back you up in a number of different domains. So, right, you mentioned Western medicine, and in typical domains that we would think of in terms of the human body and how it works, those areas will definitely back you up around the impact of stress and the outcomes that it can have for cardiovascular disease, among other crazy conditions as well. I mean, there's wide ranging effects that stress has been connected to. But also in the positive psychology literature, they've looked at decreasing stress and increasing happiness. And sometimes that gets this sort of like fluffy bad name, like, oh, that's adorable. You're just telling people to walk around and smile all the time. And I mean, there's nothing behind that. And we're all just supposed to fake like we're having a good day. And that isn't it at all. It's these techniques that really do cultivate actual happiness, like not you faking like you are, because that's like another layer of stress that you're adding on yourself, but actual happiness and fulfillment. And as a result, your brain is literally squeezing out different hormones and squeezing out different endorphins that cause your body chemistry to change and cause it to react in different ways. And so it's cool because the work that you're doing and the results that you're having, they're backed up by all these different areas of literature that are sort of seemingly unrelated, but they're not unrelated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're so true. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because now I want to go, you'll have to share with me the research studies if you're able to, because I'm so interested, to learn more about how and what you're reading.
Yeah. I mean, for you, for right now, and for those out there who are listening, if you're at all interested in that area, so positive psych is a crazy powerful area of psychology. One of the best books that I would recommend, there's a guy named Martin Seligman, who is sort of like the Madonna of positive psychology. He's like the godfather. I would just get a little nervous if I got to, meet him and shake his hand, because he's kind of a big deal in terms of like as famous as a nerd can be. He's pretty darn famous. But he wrote a book called Flourish that is incredible, but it has a huge section on the biological impacts of reducing stress, increasing happiness, increasing engagement in activities that you love doing, increasing our connection to other people, like all these pillars that lead to a great, fulfilling life. There's biological outcomes to it, to the point that in animal studies, they've actually found animals who have cancer who live longer as a result of putting them in these environments that allow them to flourish. So it's just crazy. I mean, and I think that is something that is very lacking from Western medicine. We don't focus on those pieces as much, whereas the holistic approach that is taken in more Eastern medicine, or sometimes, we call it alternative medicine in the US, some of those pieces are still really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think like the important thing is too, and, I was thinking a lot about this because I'm studying holistic nutrition, but I'm definitely like somewhere in the middle of like, I'm not like all the way holistic and I'm not all the way, Western. I think I'm somewhere in the middle, but I have to sometimes wonder, because I can get a little woo with things, but like none of us ever really know, right? Because you often hear, I mean, we know we do the research studies and things like that, but then miracles happen and you hear these one-off anecdotal stories and you hear these just like incredible things happening. So I always like encourage people like just to keep an open mind about, what your body can actually do. And it's really only limited by the beliefs that you have about it, because none of us ever really know. And we're, depending on what you believe you might not know until we cross over, or maybe you don't believe in that, and that's fine too. But what I'm saying is like, none of us ever really know for sure. And we can take our best guess and do all the research and read everything we can get our hands on. But I think never underestimate like the power of like what, that a miracle can happen, or, something unexpected.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you were to, talk to my audience, let's say there's someone out there who really feels like they could up-level their nutritional game or their wellness game. What are some, I guess, practical tips and practical ways that somebody can get started along this journey if it's something that they are not as familiar with, or maybe it's an area that they don't feel as comfortable in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm a really big fan. And of course, it depends on what your goals are. Like if someone comes to me and they, I just worked with a woman who came to me and said, I want to lose 15 pounds by the time my daughter has her wedding in 2 months. And that's like one very specific goal, right? But if somebody has a more general goal of, I want to just kind of like improve my health, eat better, take better care of myself, the first, thing that I would recommend is taking like a more ancestral approach to how you're eating. And what I mean by that is if you think about an area in the world that you're from, like I'll take my boyfriend, for example, he's Indian and his ancestors and his parents are vegetarian and, they eat in, a certain way and they have ghee and they have, certain types of even though they're vegetarian, they'll have like animal products like milk and things like that. I would take a look at how your ancestors ate and try to mimic that as best that you can. And I think like it's very hard to put like people in a box and say like you should be eating like this much of this and this much of that and stay away from this. But I think as like an overarching theme, the more whole food sources that you eat, the better. So that means like staying away from packaged foods as much as you can. And that's not to say that you should like write them off completely, but I would say like, 80% of your diet, I believe, will benefit you if it comes from whole food sources, like things that you can find on the perimeter of the grocery store. Like fruits and vegetables, if you're non-vegetarian or non-vegan, then meat and animal products, healthy sources of fats, oil, like olive oil, coconut oil, things like that. And, if grains agree with you, then, throw those in too. I think, but that doesn't mean that like you shouldn't have like, a package of whatever it is, like crackers or something like that once in a while. I think it's really about balancing and, just aiming for mostly whole food sources and thinking about how your ancestors ate. Because what's interesting is they are really finding that different things really work best for different people, and genetics do play a role in that. So I don't know what that's going to mean for my children because I'm Middle Eastern and Italian, and my boyfriend's Indian. So I don't know, but yeah, I think that taking an ancestral approach is definitely something to consider.
I love it. And then too, in this area of, I mean, you can't be on the internet for 5 seconds without some type of offer coming your way about how you can lose 60 pounds in the next 48 hours. And I'm totally exaggerating, but these, really outlandish sounding claims. And we've all heard too, I mean, even beyond that, we've all heard about how some of the more popular, and I'll say popular meaning a lot of people have tried them, diets are ones that aren't as sustainable for people. So I guess the next question that I have is, what do you feel like is a realistic mindset for somebody to have as they're going into this journey? Because 60 pounds in 48 hours and you're only going to eat coconut for the rest of your life because that's the diet you're on. I mean, we all know, the rational side of us knows that that's not sustainable. So I'm curious from you, from somebody who is really tuned in to the individual's body and really taking this holistic approach, what do you feel like is a good mindset and a good realistic set of goals to keep in mind if you were to start down this journey?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And like, it's so funny because I have so many clients come to me and say, well, I did, Jenny Craig Weight Watchers 6 times and it's always worked. And I'm like, well, then why did you do it 6 times? So you're absolutely right in that, like, a lot of these programs out there just aren't sustainable. They teach you how to follow a program or how to buy their food, but they don't teach you how to go out to dinner with your family or how to be on vacation or how to maintain your results. And when it comes to weight loss, there are 2 things that are really important. Number 1 is hormones, as we kind of talked about earlier. So if your hormones are off, let's say, your thyroid is off or your female sex hormones are off, like progesterone and estradiol, then weight loss can be nearly impossible. So those have to be balanced, first and foremost. Secondly, calories matter. Calories aren't everything, but even if you are, eating the most organic and healthful food, if you're eating too much, you're not going to lose weight. So portion control is very important. Again, if somebody has been dieting, and this is such an interesting, like, anecdotal story that I just want to share really quick, but I had this client come to me who had been doing a 1,200 calorie diet for almost a decade.
What?
Yes. and she did
Wow.
not lose any weight. And I said to her, I really want you to check with your doctor. I'd really like you to, talk with him about getting these blood tests done, have your thyroid checked, and then we'll talk. And she did, and everything came back normal. And I said, okay, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we're actually going to increase your calories to nearly double. And she was so nervous. She was so scared because she was eating 1,200 calories a day. And over the course of about 5-6 months, we got her to just about 2,000 calories, which is almost double. And she lost 10 pounds.
Wow.
That is what I call a reverse diet. So that's somebody who was eating too little for so long, and the body starts to adapt to that. But what we forget about calories specifically is the body actually needs calories like just to function. Like your brain needs a certain amount, like your heart needs a certain amount, your everyday activities like require calories. So if you underfeed, then your body is going to go into a shocked and stressed state, and it's going to hoard fat like crazy because to your body, fat means survival.
Yeah.
So to eat up the muscle and is going to hold on the fat. So
exactly what we want, right?
Yeah. So I think that's, and I've done that with several people before and had really good results if that was, what I felt like they needed to do. It can be a very powerful tool. It's called, again, reverse dieting. But, keeping in mind that the body is not this machine. And it's not, you can't just eat 1,200 calories for 10 years and expect that it's not going to have a consequence. So, I think that and it's not our fault because we're just bombarded with all of these messages, like you said. But just to kind of, to answer your question, hormones and calories are most important thing. And you never want to, go too low, if you are cutting calories or, you're watching your portions. Cause like I said, that can kind of cause an adverse response, not something you'd really want. Right. I do think that those two things are the most important, making sure what I call it a safe calorie deficit. So, if you were to go to Google and you were to Google, what is my TDEE? It's called total daily energy expenditure. And there are a bunch of calculators that you could use if you want to figure that out. And then you would just get that number and then create anywhere from a 15 to 25% deficit from that. And you should start to see some movement if weight loss is your goal.
Amazing. So as we're starting to wind down today, I kind of want to go in a direction that loops back to where we started. We started in this conversation having a chat about your journey into entrepreneurship. And, I kind of asked about advice and tips that you have for people looking to improve their, health and well-being, but similar question, but on the entrepreneur side. So what advice or thoughts or wisdom do you have for somebody who is thinking that this might be the path that they want to go down, and maybe they're ready to jump into the nice, secure world of entrepreneurship? But I mean, really, you have this background of having a mentor growing up who was in that space, and then too, you're on your own path as well. So I'm curious to hear what you would tell other people who are maybe interested in doing this for themselves.
Definitely. Two things. First of all, I think that, it's going to depend on what your comfort level is with risk. I tend to be a very much a risk taker. I'm not very risk averse, but I'm a really big fan of making bold exclamations and taking bold action. So I think that nothing sends the message better to yourself and to, the universe than quitting a job, starting something. It could be even as small as, incorporating an LLC, just taking that actual step. I think that first step is always the hardest. But I think that it's often the thing that's needed to really take you or up level you and take you like to that next place. It's not as scary. People always think that, you quit your job or you do this or you do that. And then all of a sudden, like you're broken on the street. And often it's not, I get everyone's situation is different, but you'd be surprised. It's not as scary as you think. And you find ways to make it work, right? Like I think that we become paralyzed by fear a lot of times, and it's never as scary as we think it's going to be. The other thing I wanted to share is just to be really open about how your journey is going to unfold. I think like one of the things that I noticed about my peers when I was in business school is that everybody had this idea of where they want to be and how it was going to unfold. And I really knew, I went to business school in Boston at Babson, as I mentioned. I knew I wanted to be in California, but I kind of let go of the rest. And I let go of the how, I should say. And I think by letting go of the how, I really opened myself up to a lot of opportunities that got me to where I am now. Mm-hmm. I think holding too tightly onto the how holds a lot of people back, and they're unable to see all the opportunities around them. So
I love it. Okay, so when people are all excited and they want to learn more about you after listening to this interview, where can people find you online?
Yeah, 2 places. Feel free to join. I have a free Facebook group with 1,000 women, and I'm always in there doing live streams and giving away free content and free coaching. And that's called Move, Fuel, Nourish. And that's a free online community. And then my website is jaimemorocco.com. And, if you Google me, you'll find it. My name is kind of a little tricky to spell, but it will, if you go to jaimemorocco.com, feel free to get in contact with me there. I have a contact page. I do free consultations. I have a bunch of free guides on there. So feel free to get in touch.
I love it. Before I let you go today, I have to ask you the final question that I ask everybody who is on the podcast. And we are compiling a Spotify Power playlist, which is just a playlist that is out on Spotify that has been curated completely by the women who I have interviewed on Women Inspired. And so I have to ask you for your favorite motivational song to add to our playlist.
Katy Perry, Rise is...
Yeah.
Is that already on there? Because I checked a few days ago, but I haven't checked since.
I don't think so. Okay. I don't think so. I'm racking my brain. I don't think it's on there. No.
It's such a good one.
Yes.
I love it.
I love it. Jaime, this was amazing. I'm so thrilled that this interview finally happened. It totally made my day because, like I said, we worked hard to make this happen. So it was so wonderful to get to know you. It was wonderful to hear about your work. I'm so grateful that you were so open about both your entrepreneurial journey and what that has been like, and then also your own personal health journey and how that's led you to be so passionate about the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being on. It was just wonderful to get to know you.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure, and I just had the best time. So thank you for allowing me to share my story, and it was great.
All right, you guys, I really hope you had as much fun getting to know Jaime Morocco as I did. And honestly, please check out her website because you can completely get a feel for her personality and the way that she approaches her work and nutrition and wellness. If you just even spend 30 seconds on her website, it is just wonderful. And it is one of those amazing lights on the internet, just like a corner of the internet that you definitely need to explore. So I would highly suggest you check out jaimemorocco.com. It is just a wonderful resource and a wonderful place to get to know more about the work that Jaime is doing. As always, I have a couple of things that I want to call out. Number one, we spent a chunk of our time chatting about the idea of entrepreneurship. And I really wanted to highlight the fact that, she and I both kind of had this weird conception of the fact that there is some stability in being an entrepreneur. And I don't want to downplay the risk associated with it. I don't want to say that it's all roses and all perfect and all wonderful. But her point toward the end of her interview was such a good one. So many times, and this definitely applies to entrepreneurship as a topic that we think about, but also in a lot of other areas. So many times, the worst case scenario that we imagine, it actually isn't very likely to happen. You know, so many times we freak out that something completely catastrophic would happen, and it's very unlikely and typically doesn't end up playing out that way. So I bring this up because I would never want the fear of something like that to keep somebody from even just exploring the idea of chasing a big goal or a big dream that they might have. Obviously, you have to be smart. Obviously, you have to take the right steps and make some educated decisions and that type of thing. But, you know, I just really wanted to call out that sometimes our minds and our mindset gets the best of us and keeps us from even entertaining the idea that we might do something a little bit different than what we're doing now. And that pertains to entrepreneurship and other areas. So wanted to call that out. Secondly, the other thing I wanted to call out is, you know, I came across a video on YouTube one time of a man who was talking about what it was like to live as a person who is pretty overweight. And he was talking about how sometimes complete strangers online or other close people in his family would say things to him that were pretty derogatory and pretty negative. And then they would kind of couch those comments as, well, I'm just trying to help you. I'm just trying to help you get healthier and blah, blah, blah. And the point he made was one that was so poignant, and it's worth calling out here. His point was, you take care of the things that you love. So if you hate your car and you don't care about your car, you probably have soda cans, you know, rolling around on the floor of it, and it's probably not super clean, and you probably don't take it in for routine maintenance and all of those things that you know, are supposed to do with your vehicle. Versus if your car is your baby and you love it, you absolutely love it, you're probably getting it detailed really often. You're probably keeping minimally, you're keeping garbage out of it. You're, you know, getting oil changes and doing that preventative maintenance that you're supposed to do. And his point was, same thing with your body. You take care of what you love. And he talked so much about how those negative comments and sometimes those negative comments were coming from himself, by the way, but any of that negativity that causes us to just, you know, not like ourselves, that leads us to not take care of ourselves as much as we would want to. And I wanted to call that out because sometimes that mindset piece is such an important one to cultivate when you're on a journey like this. You know, bringing in information about how you can improve your diet and move more and all of those pieces are definitely important too. But I mean, I would highly suggest if you're in a position where you're really going to go down a road like this, do some of that mental and psychological exploration as well, because it's only going to set you up to be even more successful. And to help you on that journey, I've interviewed a number of people throughout the life of the podcast who focus their work on helping people achieve wellness, however that might be defined. Or there are people who are very focused on achieving certain things with their bodies. So people who are athletes or have done amazing physical, you know, things. It's very broadly defined, but I've actually developed a playlist of all of those podcast episodes. So if you go to aprilseifert.com, scroll down a little ways on my page, and you'll get to the podcast playlists that I have. There is one called Love Your Body. And obviously Jaime is on that playlist, but there are a lot of other people as well who are focused on these same types of topics to help you move down that path of loving your body for what it can do, not necessarily what it looks like. Loving your body in spite or regardless of what it looks like. It is that deep love for the body that you're in that I want to help you cultivate and create. So just wanted to call that out, that playlist is there for you if this is an area that you want to explore further. Before we close out today, I want to say thank you to my producer, Cameron Hill. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who might benefit from this content. And if you have a moment, click the link in the episode description to leave me a rating and a review on iTunes. It would mean so much to me. Finally, if you're ready to start making changes in your life to align your day with your goals and your values and what fills you up, I have a free tool to help you get started. Sign up at aprilseifert.com to get immediate access to my free Life by Design life blueprinting tool. I designed this tool using theory from the fields of psychology and design thinking, and it will absolutely help you get clear on the areas of your life that are serving you and those that aren't. Clarity is a critical first step before you can design your own best life. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Until next time, have an inspiring week.